CityWorks Expo is a collaborative, co-creative, and multidisciplinary idea exchange and festival conference that happens each fall in Roanoke, Virginia. By day, attendees are immersed in thought-provoking presentations, riveting performances, and engaging dialogue. By night, the conference continues with after-hours networking opportunities during street festivals, parties, and musical events. To learn more about Expo, visit cityworksexpo.com. Expo 2014 was made possible by these fine sponsors.
I wanted to talk to you today about entrepreneurship in Africa and the African Renaissance and how entrepreneurs are transforming the continent. Who can tell me the difference between these two photos? Right? Time? Experience? I was very proud of my cowboy boots, okay? So when I look at this picture, most people would look at this picture and notice the cowboy boots and maybe upgrade in fashion, and maybe I lost a little weight in my cheeks. But when I look at this picture, I see two eras in Africa. When I was a kid, where we had conflict everywhere. I grew up with refugees from Sierra Leone and Liberia. I grew up at a time when we simply had problems everywhere. You look left, you look right, there was a new coup d'etat, there was a new civil war, there was disaster going on. There was very little to be proud of. And I'll never forget, as a kid, when I was going to school one day and I saw the magazine from The Economist that called Africa the Dark Continent. Fast forward in time, and today, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. Today, the same magazine that growing up called Africa the Dark Continent did a news spread that says Africa Rising, because they can no longer ignore 1 billion consumers who spent $1 trillion on the continent. Africa is rising. But Africa's rise has been very interesting. If we look at the traditional prescriptions for growth in Africa, a big one has been development aid. Over $1 trillion in African-related aid has been dispersed on the continent in the last 60 years. $1 trillion. Yet real per capita income today is lower than it was in the 1970s. And if you watch that graph, as aid increased, real per capita income actually decreased from the 70s up to close to the 2000s before you saw a reversal. And so the old idea of throw money at a problem, or let's just increase aid to Africa, simply does not work. It doesn't. And the empirical evidence has shown that. What's the difference between these two pictures? Expression. So, the picture where I'm upset and screaming and fighting for social justice, and the other picture where I'm smiling in a suit, reflect an evolution of my philosophy on how best to aid the continent. I grew up with a humanitarian background, as I mentioned, in an era where we had the issues in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and my parents were very much involved in human rights activism, which I still think is important. But I increasingly grew discontent with the explosive growth in the number of nonprofits on the continent. And I simply wasn't seeing the same impact as we saw in this. You saw this explosive growth in aid, and we did not have that same explosive growth in impact. I started a nonprofit called Clean Aqua, focused on clean water and sanitation, because problems related to water and sanitation actually kill more children than AIDS and malaria combined. It's one of the leading causes of infant mortality under age 5. And I was in this community, Ejimante. And we had a huge community meeting. And I told everyone in the community, imagine if I had a World Bank budget and I could write a check for any amount. What would you want? And I had preconceived notions of what I thought people wanted. And I imagined people would ask for, build me a school, build me a hospital, give everyone a check for $1 million. I don't know, I would have probably asked for that. And I was surprised and shocked at the response. 99% of people said, we want jobs. We want jobs. And that catalyzed a shift in my thinking on how to actually aid Africa. In thinking that where we create real sustainable change and where that change mirrors actual demand is in creating jobs for people. People do not want handouts. They want to be empowered. They want the dignity to have work, to be able to provide for their families, and to be able to take that surplus income and figure out how to allocate it to their own activities, to better their own lives and families. And that's when I realized that I could have a greater impact on the continent, moving away from activism work, which I still think is important, but focusing instead on entrepreneurship, focusing on building companies that would be able to create jobs and that would be able to empower Africans across the board. And so, bananas. I went to Kenya. I traveled around the continent looking for entrepreneurs, looking for great entrepreneurs with great ideas. And I was in Kenya, I was in Nairobi, and I met a 26-year-old entrepreneur called Eric Mutomi. Now, Eric grew up in Western Kenya and grew up in his village. There were a lot of banana farmers. Banana was huge. In fact, Kenya has over 400,000 banana farmers. 400,000 banana farmers. And the problem Eric realized was every time there was a harvest, each banana farmer just produces as many bananas as possible. And no one's able to take in all the supply, and they go to waste. So he was very frustrated about this issue. How do I solve this problem of oversupply of banana? Now let's take a step back and go back to the traditional prescriptions for growth in Africa. We spoke about aid and how aid isn't working. The new silver bullet everyone is talking about today and everyone is excited about is microcredit, right? Kiva.org, $100 to a woman to buy a goat. Transformational possibilities. Now let's play a little thought experiment. Let's say you went to each of these banana farmers, 500 of them, and you gave every single one of them $200. With the $200, they're able to get a dryer, they can dry the surplus bananas, and now they get 15% more revenues at the local markets. Or you concentrate that capital and take $100,000 and give it to one savvy entrepreneur who he or she sets up a banana processing factory, which now provides 40% additional income to all those 500 banana farmers and creates an additional 50 jobs. That's what Eric did. And that's why we backed Eric. We invested in Eric, and Eric's company called Stawi is now leveraging economies of scale and using modern manufacturing processes to create value for not only its owners, but its workers, who have an ownership stake in the company as well. So at Golden Palm, what we focus on doing is not to just look at how can we take resources out of the continent, but how can we create businesses that solve problems, that solve actual real problems. And so in this situation, we're helping to solve food security. We're helping to empower farmers and solve the issue of oversupply. We're helping to create jobs. We're helping to develop the local economy. And we hope to become rich in the process, which is a good thing. That's what we need. We need to create indigenous wealth in Africa because that is a sustainable solution to prevent this cycle of dependency and this cycle of poverty. We went on then to fund other promising entrepreneurs, like Gregory Roxon over here, who Gregory realized that there's a big problem on the continent. Pharma spending is estimated to be $45 billion in the next decade. $45 billion. Yet no one knows who's spending what, where, why. No clue. There's zero data. And as a result of that, no one, at the government level, no one is able to figure out which provinces or which regions need drugs more than the other. What are the most common diseases? Where are the biggest drivers of demand? No one has this data. On the pharma side, no one has this data either. Big Pharma has no idea what's being consumed when on real time. And so Greg got a bunch of his CS buddies together, and they created a program called mPharma. What mPharma does is it links clinics, hospitals, doctors, pharmacies, and everyone in that ecosystem together. And it builds this incredible application where you go to Zambia and you go to a clinic or a hospital that has a software, and your doctor e-prescribes amoxicillin for you. So that reduces error, because error actually contributes to a lot of adverse drug reaction on the continent. You get a unique SMS code sent to you. You take that to a pharmacist. You show the code to the pharmacist. Because the pharmacist is hooked up to this whole system, the pharmacist is able to look at the data and say, well, Greg, Hospital A told you to take this drug, but I have your data from Hospital C, in which you didn't do too well with this drug the other day. So we're able to solve this issue of adverse drug reactions and enhance pharmacovigilance. And on top of that, because we're hooked up to the manufacturing guys and the distribution guys and everyone in the ecosystem, we can actually check the drug out and let you know whether it's a real drug or it's counterfeit. And that's a big issue on the continent. So then we take all this data together, and we're able to create an analytics platform that is now enabling the government of Zambia to take a look and say, we have a serious problem with getting malaria drugs to this province. We now have a program that's able to have Novartis look at it and say, there's more demand for our products here. We need to reallocate our resources. And so it's solving real local problems, it's creating value, and we hope it'll generate a lot of indigenous wealth. But beyond just supporting entrepreneurs and their great ideas, what we also need on the continent is infrastructure. This is one of the projects we're investing in, is in solving this issue of a massive infrastructure deficit, where the continent needs billions and billions of dollars in infrastructure. And across the board, we need more roads, we need more bridges, but we also need homes. Nigeria has a housing deficit of 14 million. Ghana has a housing deficit of 2 million. That grows every single year. So it might not be the sexiest approach. It might not make you feel as great as going on kiva.org and giving microloans. But the reality is, supporting these types of projects where you concentrate capital in fewer higher impact entrepreneurs actually has the potential to transform the continent in a much more powerful way than the everyman as an entrepreneur model. Which, by the way, is a romanticized idea. My work and travel across 40 plus countries across Africa has taught me that most people want jobs. So after I had these experiences, I became very intrigued about the potential for these entrepreneurs to transform the continent. And I decided to go on a trip. And I went to 30 different countries on the continent. And I met 300 plus entrepreneurs, documenting their stories and getting a sense of how this new generation, this cheetah generation of entrepreneurs are changing the landscape forever. And I wanted to share two of those stories with you. Jamila, who I met in Niamey, Niger. Honestly, after I met Jamila, I had goosebumps for days. Her story is just absolutely extraordinary. She grew up dirt poor in Niger. Niger, by the way, is one of the poorest countries in the world, even relative to other African countries, incredibly poor. Very little infrastructure, nothing. They have huge issues in Niger. Lots of conflict issues and very little investment. She grew up in the streets. She was abandoned and lived on the streets and was a street kid. All her friends turned to prostitution. And she didn't in the beginning and was mocked for it. She would instead sell iced water. And her friends would mock her and tell her, and I'll never forget what she told me. She said, they told me I was too poor to be self-righteous. Too poor to be self-righteous. She kept insisting on selling this iced water, and then eventually got a break when someone from the US came with clothes from Salvation Army. And she thought of a new business idea and started selling secondhand clothes. Saved up a little money as time went on. And when there was an aid worker who needed to dry clean his clothes and realized that there was not a single dry cleaner in Niamey, a light bulb popped up. She said, I should open a dry cleaning service. She borrowed some money, saved a little money, scrimmed here and there, rented a place in a building that I went to. That's the building actually behind us. You can't really see it. And her rent at the time was $35 a month. And she struggled to make those payments. Struggled. Today, she owns the building. She's the largest dry cleaning person in Niger. She owns a chain of them. She owns a chain of restaurants. She's the largest Western Union agent. And she's getting sick and tired of congestion in Niger, in Niamey, in the streets of Niamey. So her new idea is she wants to put in place underground garages. Right? This is the power of what one entrepreneur, given the right type of backing, can do. And these are the stories that I think illustrate the potential for a new Africa. Joanny Bewa of Benin was another. She was just extraordinary. I mean, I had to ask her again, you're only 26? How's that possible? So, Joanny is a doctor. She has an MD and she's simultaneously pursuing a master's in public health, a PhD, and a specialty in gynecology. On top of that, when the president of Benin refused to put in place a law that would empower women and girls, she took to the streets and organized the largest grassroots activist movement that eventually compelled him to promulgate the law in 2012. She's built a massive social enterprise training young girls and has impacted over 10,000 girls in Benin alone. And I mean, the work she's done has just been extraordinary. She's been honored by the White House here. And when she was in DC, she made a controversial speech in which she attacked the leadership on the continent and told the White House, you cannot continue to coddle bad leadership. You need to take a principled stance because what we need is good leadership on the continent. And she said, this Afro-pessimism needs to give way to a new generation and a new wave of Afro-optimism. And she's the vanguard of this Afro-optimism. I mean, you go and see the work she's doing with young girls in the community and how she's taken all that she's learned and creating these change agents, and you'll be marveled. You will be absolutely marveled. And this ultimately is what is going to transform the continent. So I called my mom before I came here, and I asked my mom, as I continue to look for entrepreneurs across the continent, and as I look to build this movement of entrepreneurs as the key to sustainable development on the continent, I was looking for how do you pick out an entrepreneur? How do you look for things that can tell you this person has potential and you can capture them early on and hone it? And I know I've been entrepreneurial for a very long time, so I called my mother and I had a conversation with her and I said, what things should I look out? And she sent me these two pictures. She said, fashion confusion. I said, Mom, is fashion confusion to you? Me as avant-garde. But the bigger picture here is, I think there's a lot more work and scholarship to be done in really trying to understand how we can hone entrepreneurship, how we can identify the talent, and how we can nurture it to create this new generation, to create more Jamilas, to create more Joannis, to create more Gregory Roxons, to create more Eric Mutomis. Because ultimately, those people and people like them are where we're going to have the highest ROI and where we're going to ultimately be able to transform Africa. I wanted to give credit to Kamla Dumont, who actually was the reason why I traveled around Africa and is the reason why I collect all these stories. Kamla unfortunately passed away earlier this year and was one of the greatest journalists we've ever had on the continent. He was the face of BBC Africa. And Kamla told me and told the world that if we don't tell our stories, others will do it for us. And he inspired me and inspired everyone in my generation to be unapologetic about being African. 10 years ago, I probably would have made this speech wearing a Western suit. Today, I am proudly and unapologetically African. So thank you, Kamla. My final word is, as another person we lost, Madiba was a hero of mine growing up. And when I reflect on the legacy of Madiba, the political freedom for which our forebears fought was instrumental in bringing Africa to where it is today. Instrumental. But it's actually meaningless without economic freedom. So for my generation, we have work to do to match this powerful legacy that Madiba and Nkrumah and Kenyatta and all those freedom fighters left for us by making sure that we consolidate the gains in the political arena, create new gains in the economic arena, and spread the prosperity so that we can actually create a better Africa for every single African. Thank you.